Back before battle passes, skins and yearly releases, Call of Duty started somewhere very different. In 2003, the very first Call of Duty launched and completely changed how World War II shooters were made. Cinematic missions, huge battles, shooting mechanics that felt so good and set the standards for any FPS game. And just a year later, the expansion of Call of Duty United Offensive made everything even bigger, with longer missions, larger battlefields, and some of the most memorable moments in the entire early series. So today, I'm going to go back and play both of these again to see how well they actually hold up over 20 years later. So when people talk about Call of Duty today, they usually think of massive blockbuster releases, huge multiplayer modes, battle passes, yearly releases, and Warzone. But the series had to start somewhere, and that beginning was the original Call of Duty from 2003. Looking back now, it's actually amazing how many of the core ideas that made the series successful were already present right there from the start. The campaign formula, the cinematic missions, the one soldier in the middle of a massive war feeling, it's all here. And honestly, going back to it today, there's something incredibly refreshing about it, and just how simple and focused the game was. Unlike a lot of modern Call of Duty campaigns that follow one main storyline, the original game takes a slightly different approach. You play through 3 separate campaigns: the American, the British, and the Soviet campaign. Each one focuses on different soldiers and different battles during World War II. This structure works really well because it shows the war from multiple perspectives, and it keeps the campaign constantly changing in terms of setting and atmosphere. You'll fight through small towns, forests, snow-covered battlefields, urban environments. There's just a ton of memorable moments in this campaign which all relate to real-life battles, from the D-Day landings and fighting in Brecourt Manor, or landing in a glider attacking Pegasus Bridge. And one of the most memorable moments comes during the Soviet campaign, when you're charging towards the Reichstag building, with its iconic moment near the end of World War II. That final push feels genuinely epic, and if you're a huge fan of the HBO series Band of Brothers, a lot of the environments and battle scenarios here feel very familiar. And I've mentioned it in previous videos, I'm someone who absolutely loves that show, so seeing similar settings pop up in this game was brilliant. Another really cool historic detail is that this is actually the first time we're introduced to Captain Price. Now, he sounds completely different here compared to the modern games. The voice actor changed later on, but it's still really interesting to go back and see where one of the most iconic characters in the franchise first appeared. And even back then, he was just a key icon for the game. So, looking at the gameplay, this is where you really start to see why this game was such a big deal when it was released. By modern standards, it's a pretty basic shooter, but honestly, that simplicity is part of its strength. The formula is incredibly straightforward: move through the battlefield, completely objective, fight alongside AI soldiers, but it just all works perfectly. And in many ways, the simple structure is exactly what made Call of Duty so successful in the first place. Modern games often try to add more systems, more mechanics, more complexity, but sometimes just going back to basics works the best. Combat still feels surprisingly solid too. The shooting mechanics don't feel widely different from modern Call of Duty games. Weapons feel responsive, aiming feels tight, and gunfights still feel satisfying. Overall, it's a real smooth experience when shooting. One thing I did notice though is the flinch is pretty damn strong in this game. If you get shot while aiming, your weapon kicks about, quite a bit. And the muzzle flash, especially on the mounted MG42, honestly, it's just absolutely blinding. But aside from that, combat holds up really well. It's also before the days regen health was popular, so you'll be looking around for med packs to restore your health. This isn't too much of an issue as there's a fair amount of them knocking about, but you can make it playing through on the hard difficulties more challenging, with you less likely to take more risks. And one of the things that really surprised me when revisiting this game is just how helpful the friendly AI can actually be. In some Call of Duty games, your teammates, well, they might as well not exist, but here they actually contribute to fights, taking out enemies and make the battles feel bigger than just you running through the levels alone. Even though the gameplay still follows that classic Call of Duty formula of the one soldier taking on just entire armies, it still feels like you're part of a larger battle. And honestly, I can't stress enough just how refreshing it is to play this boots on the ground World War II story again. Especially compared to where parts of the series have gone recently with futuristic tech and just more over the top storylines. You just have to look at Battlefield 6 for example. They've gone for a more of a boots on the ground approach again, and it worked really well to start with. Let's ignore how it's kind of dropped off recently, but that initial point was what we wanted to focus on. And I do feel like if Call of Duty went back to this boots on the ground approach, it would be hugely successful. As long as they keep the content up on it, people would love it. Now, obviously this game is from 2003, so expectations have to be realistic when looking at the graphics. But honestly, they're really not that bad. Character models still look pretty decent, with noticeable badges on their uniforms, and even the weapons they are holding look pretty well polished. Animations are perfectly acceptable, although unique reload animations aren't a thing here, so you just see them just reloading M1 Garand for every weapon. And weapons are well designed and easily recognisable. Even as an old game as it is, they don't look horrific at all. For a game that's over 20 years old now, it's aged far better than you might expect. And considering how early it was in the life of the franchise, it's impressive at how polished everything feels. And another highlight for this game is the soundtrack. It has that classic World War II orchestra style, which fits perfect for the tone of the game. One mission where the music really stands out, again, is that final push to the Reichstag, where the music ramps up as you charge forward and finishes on a really cinematic high note. Moments like that give the game really strong cinematic feeling overall, something Call of Duty would later become famous for. Another small detail I've always loved is the end credit sequence. After finishing the campaign, you get this side-scrolling screen showing a soldier fighting through D-Day. When I was younger, I used to absolutely love watching that, and coming back now, I still really enjoyed it. It makes you stick around to actually watch the credits. It almost lets you imagine that's what your character looked like during the campaign. I can't remember exactly which Call of Duty game stopped doing those little cinematic credit moments, but honestly I wish they'd bring them back because they were such a joy just to finish the game on. They also did experiment with vehicle missions in this game. There's an early tank mission that's fairly simple, nothing spectacular, but it was still a nice change of pace. And it's interesting because later on in Call of Duty games this would be continued to be experimented with a few years, and you did get to fly different vehicles and drive different vehicles throughout them Call of Duty games, but the actual tank missions and most kind of vehicle missions are actually something that's disappeared from the most recent entries, which is a bit of a shame because it does help break it up where you're doing something just a little bit different. Now as for the campaign itself, well, it's pretty damn short for modern standards. You could probably finish it in around 4 hours, which is, well, it's incredibly quick. But because the missions are short, varied and constantly moving between different factions and locations, it never really feels repetitive. And considering how cheap the game is during a Steam sale, it's just a great experience to go back to. And if you've never played it, honestly, you need to give it a try and see how Call of Duty developed over the years and where it started from. There's also a multiplayer mode, which surprisingly still has an active community. Even today, there's still players playing it where you can jump into servers and find a game. And for a game that released over 2 decades ago, it's pretty damn incredible. And as for reviews, well, on Steam today, the game sits at very positive. And, well, once again, I completely agree with that. This game was a massive step forward in first-person shooters when it released. It helped define the cinematic military shooter that the industry would follow for years. And overall, it is just a really, really good game. There's also just a wild bit of trivia in this game, and something that probably would surprise people that play it. And that's that Jason Statham actually voices someone in this game. He voices one of the British soldiers called Sergeant Waters during the campaign, which is pretty wild considering how big of an actor he became later on.
Heavens, we need to blow up that flak gun.
It's one of those small details that makes revisiting the game even more interesting. I mean, I didn't even realise he did the voice acting until I played it again for this video, and I thought, that sounds like him, and then when I looked it up online, it is him. It's just crazy I never noticed it, considering just how many times I've played this game. It just shows you that going back and playing old games that you love is, you're always going to notice something different or new. So look, my final thoughts on the first game, well, there's definitely some nostalgia here for me when playing this. It was one of the first PC games I ever played, so it holds a special place in my memory. But even putting that nostalgia aside, I still think this is genuinely a brilliant game. The gameplay holds up, the missions are memorable, and the campaign is excellent. But most importantly, it laid the foundation of one of the biggest gaming franchises ever created. If you're a massive fan of Call of Duty and never played the original game, honestly I genuinely recommend going back and giving it a try, because this is where it all started, and even more than 20 years later, well, it's still a classic. And so about a year after this original Call of Duty game released, we got the expansion pack United Offensive. It launched in September 2004 and was designed to expand pretty much on everything the original game did well. Bigger missions, more chaos on the battlefield, a few new weapons, and some really memorable campaign moments. And honestly, for an expansion, it adds a surprising amount of content. Now, just like the base game, United Offensive continues that idea of telling the war from multiple perspectives. You once again have 3 campaigns to play through, with them being the same 3 factions of American, British and Soviet. The American campaign is probably easily the standout for me. Still follows the 101st Airborne Division, but this time you are yet in another band of brothers familiar bit of territory, that being the Battle of Bastogne, which in my opinion is the best campaign across both the original game and this expansion. The snowy forests, the defensive fighting, the charge into the town and the overall atmosphere just make it feel incredibly memorable. The Soviet campaign is also really strong and honestly feels just as good as the missions in the original game, if not maybe slightly better. It keeps that large scale feeling of pushing through cities and battlefields alongside tons of soldiers. The British campaign though, well, honestly it's probably the weakest part of the expansion. It actually starts off really strong with a mission where you're a gunner inside a bomber, which is just a really cool concept. But unfortunately the mission becomes a bit tedious by the end. A lot of repetitive action of just shooting down planes and it never really varies how they approach you. You can move around the plane using different guns, but again there's no real consequences of where you sit and where you're shooting down planes. And after that, a lot of the British missions involve riding in the back of vehicles like trucks or motorbikes while shooting enemies. Now look, one mission like that would have been fine, but when nearly half of the campaign uses this same mechanic and it just starts to feel repetitive and a bit boring. And it's a real shame because at one point you have a mission where you're fighting with the SAS and you get the iconic Sten gun and it just feels super cool, but the part of this mission is so short in comparison to riding around in the back of a jeep that it just feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity. And gameplay wise, look, this is still the exact same core gameplay as the first game. It's simple, fast paced, objective driven, but United Offensive just makes everything just feel just a little bit larger. The maps definitely feel bigger, the missions, well, they're slightly longer, or at least they feel that way, and there's just way more happening around you. You'll often see friendly soldiers fighting enemies in the distance, tanks rolling through battlefields, or just explosions going off around the map. The original game had moments like this, but the expansion really pushes that just larger scale and making it feel bigger. I mean, the attack on Foy, it genuinely feels like a massive attack on that town. It makes everything just feel more alive, and I could happily just sit there and just watch the AI fight it out as they scale through just these really big, massive, epic fights. One of the key mechanics they actually added to the expansion was the ability to sprint, which is incredible to think that games early on, especially around this era and before, never had sprint mechanics in them. You just kind of pushed W and you went forwards. But yeah, this Call of Duty added that sprint mechanic. Not the best one, don't get me wrong, you can only sprint for about 3 seconds before you're completely out of breath, but yeah, really cool addition, and probably must be one of the first shooters definitely that added this mechanic in. So again, one of those core mechanics that you see games use all the time now, something that Call of Duty picked on really early. The expansion also introduces a few new weapons, which is always nice. They don't completely change the gameplay, but they do add a little bit of variety during the missions. And since the campaign is only about 5 hours long, having those additional weapons just helps us keep things fresh. And just like the original game, the soundtrack fits the World War II setting really well. There's some great orchestra tracks that play during the larger battle moments. And one small feature I actually really enjoyed, when you finish each campaign section, it gives you a little recap on the events, and it's quite cinematic, and yeah, it's a small detail, but it helps tie everything together and reminds you of the larger historical context behind all these missions. Now, there is still a couple of negatives with this game. So just like the base game, the flinch is still very strong, and if you get shot while aiming, your weapon moves around just ridiculous amount, which is just like the first game. Screen shake is also pretty intense, especially during the bomber mission, where it just becomes overwhelming at times. Your screens are shaking so much from the flak, especially the point where you're dropping the bombs. It's hard to keep it, well, straight at all. It's just ridiculous. But most weirdly, another surprise I actually experienced was a couple of frame drops while I was playing the game, which is kind of unexpected for a game this old. There was even one crash during my playthrough. It wasn't anything major or game breaking, but it might be related to the bigger maps and the amount of action happening and it just not being rendered correctly. I'm not sure what it was, and it only happened a few times, but yeah, it's pretty weird that a game this old was, dropping frames. Yeah, that's crazy. As for the multiplayer, I believe this is still in the same similar situation as the first game, where you can still find games. I remember playing this back in the day when it first almost came out, and boy oh boy was United Offensive so good. Some of the maps on there were incredible, especially like the map with Foying. Oh man, it was so good. And I think you can still find games which is, like I say, for a 20-year-old game is very impressive. But I think it's a little bit harder than the base game, although I'm not 100% sure with this. And as for game length, well, just like the original campaign, the expansion is pretty short. It took me around 5 hours to complete, even on the hardest difficulty, but again, because the missions are just so varied and the scale of battles is just bigger, and it just never feels dull. It's just really, really, really good game. And considering how cheap the expansion is now, it's definitely worth playing. Just keep in mind that you do need to own and have installed the original Call of Duty game in order to play this. If you have the old Call of Duty game, you don't have it installed and try to play this, you'll just get an error message. So yeah, you have to have both installed, but they're both like basically under a gig, so yeah, they take up no space whatsoever. And so my final thoughts on the expansion. Well, overall, I really enjoyed United Offensive. It takes everything from the original game and what it did and just makes it bigger and better. The American Bastille missions are just fantastic. Soviet campaign, still really, really good. The British missions admittedly are a bit disappointing, but they don't ruin the experience at all, and you can still find enjoyment within them. And for a campaign that only lasts about 5 hours, well, it still delivers plenty of memorable moments. And considering, again, how cheap you can pick up both of these games these days, it's just an absolute no-brainer to give them a blast. Even if you're not the biggest fan of old Call of Duty games, I really highly recommend just spending a couple of quid just to get these and play through them, because yeah, I can't see why you wouldn't like them. And especially if you're a fan of the classic Call of Duty World War II shooters, this expansion is absolutely worth experiencing and buying. So just some final thoughts now, looking back at both the original Call of Duty and its expansion. It's actually incredible to see just how much of the franchise's identity was already there right from the beginning. The original game laid the groundwork with its simple but incredibly effective campaign structure, telling the story of World War II through the American, British and Soviet perspectives. Then United Offensive came along and expanded that formula, just making everything feel bigger, better and longer, with just more going off around you. And in some cases, again, like the Bastille mission and the Foy mission with the 101st Airborne, it actually delivered some of the best moments across the base game and the expansion. Especially if you're someone who, like me, again, loves World War II era things, these missions feel incredibly reminiscent of real key shows and moments without history of World War II. So after going back to these early games, it just reminds me of just how different Call of Duty used to feel and how it used to be. Just how grounded it was, how focused it was on historical battles, and the gameplay was just so simple but extremely well executed. That boots on the ground style is just something that I think the series did best, and those early games, even all the way up to probably Call of Duty 4 where perks started to come in, are still some of the best that you can play. And while modern Call of Duty games are obviously far more advanced technically, there's just something about the simplicity of these early titles that just still holds up incredibly well today and is well worth checking out. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, give a subscribe to see more videos like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.